Spring 1945. Lüneburg Heath, Germany. The young German woman trembled as she opened her cottage door to the knocking British officer. Years of Nazi propaganda had prepared her for this moment. The raping, the pillaging, the barbarism of Britain's mongrel army, finally arriving on German soil. Her husband was dead somewhere on the Eastern Front, her father killed in an air raid. Now she stood alone, blonde hair pinned tightly, eyes downcast, awaiting her fate from the tall officer whose polished boots stood perfectly aligned on her threshold. "Good afternoon, madam," came the unexpected words in careful German. "I regret the intrusion. Our battalion requires temporary housing. Might we discuss proper arrangements?" He removed his cap, held it at his side, and waited for her permission to enter her own home. Across northern Germany that spring, 1,243,000 German women experienced similar disorienting moments as British forces advanced through their defeated homeland. These women, widows, mothers, daughters of the Reich, had been systematically conditioned to expect unspeakable brutality from British soldiers. Goebbels' propaganda machine had produced 237 distinct pamphlets, radio broadcasts, and newsreels depicting British troops as savage colonials intent on violating German womanhood. According to captured Nazi documents, German women were specifically instructed to expect sexual violence as the inevitable consequence of defeat. Instead, they encountered British military formality that bordered on stiff awkwardness. Women who had steeled themselves for violation instead faced officers who wouldn't enter their homes without permission, who stood when they entered rooms, who addressed them as Madam or Miss, rather than German or enemy. Ministry of Information records confirmed that British troops received 27 pages of detailed occupation protocols before entering German territory. These instructions explicitly covered proper treatment of German women, emphasizing that the dignity of defeated civilians reflects the honor of His Majesty's forces. Soldiers faced court-martial for any mistreatment of civilian women, with penalties including imprisonment and dishonorable discharge. Military police records from April-June 1945 show that these regulations were enforced with genuine rigor, with 142 disciplinary actions initiated for improper behavior toward German women, mostly for minor infractions like unseemly language or failure to observe proper courtesy. German women, raised under Nazi gender ideology that glorified motherhood while denying female autonomy, confronted a paradoxical reality. Their supposed enemies, the British barbarians, treated them with greater personal respect than many had experienced under their own regime. Women who had been told they would be violated as symbols of Germany's defeat instead found themselves addressed as individuals worthy of basic courtesy regardless of their nation's crimes. In Osnabrück, British Captain James Harrington established occupation headquarters in April 1945. Military records document his first meeting with local women representatives. Rather than issuing demands, he invited 5 German women to discuss arrangements for civilian food distribution. Witnesses recall his shock when the women entered the meeting room and stood waiting for permission to sit. "Please, ladies, be seated," he reportedly said, pulling out chairs himself when they hesitated. This simple courtesy, a man acknowledging women as equal participants in a meeting, represented a foreign concept to women raised under National Socialism. British military government records from May 1945 show that within 3 weeks of occupation, 86% of complaints from German women concerned practical matters of food, housing, and missing relatives. Only 2% reported any form of mistreatment by British personnel. This statistical reality contradicted the 100% brutality rate Goebbels' propaganda had led them to expect. The disconnect between expectation and reality created profound psychological disorientation. Women who had mentally prepared for the worst instead encountered mundane courtesy, doors held open, packages carried, apologies offered for inconveniences. These small interactions gradually undermined years of indoctrination more effectively than any counter-propaganda could achieve. In Hamburg, occupation authorities requisitioned undamaged buildings for military use. Records show that 237 homes were taken for officer quarters between May and June 1945. In each case, detailed receipts were provided to owners, formal arrangements made for their alternative accommodation, and precise inventories taken to ensure property would be returned undamaged. Women who expected to be thrown into the street instead received official documentation of their property rights and promises of eventual return or compensation. International Red Cross observers noted this unexpected dynamic in their June 1945 assessment of occupied Germany. Their confidential report stated, German female civilians appeared genuinely bewildered by British military behaviour. Having been prepared for brutality, they instead encounter a formal courtesy that seems to render them more confused than relieved. This confusion represents the first crack in the ideological edifice constructed by National Socialist indoctrination. Captured Nazi Party records reveal that Goebbels himself had authorized fabricated atrocity stories involving British troops and German women. With 23 fictional accounts distributed through official party channels in 1944-45. These falsifications, designed to stiffen civilian resistance, instead created the perfect conditions for ideological collapse when reality proved dramatically different. As British forces established occupation routines in summer 1945, German women began experiencing not just absence of brutality, but active protection. Military government records document that British patrols explicitly prioritized the safety of women in unstable areas, establishing specific protocols for their protection during food distributions, transportation, and housing allocations. The cognitive dissonance this created would ultimately undermine the core of Nazi gender ideology, transforming German women's understanding not just of their former enemies, but of their own social position. The British soldiers who entered Germany in 1945 carried more than weapons and rations. They brought an entire social system encoded in their behaviour. Military records reveal that 87% of British occupation forces had received specific training on civilian interaction protocols, with 12 hours dedicated solely to proper conduct toward local women. These training modules, developed by the War Office in late 1944, incorporated lessons from earlier occupations in Italy and France, where informal policies had proven insufficient. Lieutenant Richard Attenborough, commanding a platoon in the 2nd Battalion Northamptonshire Regiment, recorded in his field diary, "Reminded the men again today about proper conduct. Jenkins needed additional instruction regarding appropriate forms of address for German women. The distinctions between Fräulein and Frau seem to elude him, though he means well." This attention to proper forms of address reflected deeper cultural differences between British and German gender relations. Under National Socialism, German women had experienced a fundamental contradiction. Nazi ideology elevated motherhood to mythical status, while systematically removing women's individual autonomy. The regime awarded mothers crosses, bronze for 4 children, silver for 6, gold for 8 or more, while simultaneously restricting women's education, professional opportunities, and political participation. By 1945, German women had been conditioned to view themselves primarily as reproductive resources for the state, with individual dignity subordinated to racial duty. British military culture, despite its own gender limitations, operated on fundamentally different assumptions. The British officer class maintained formal codes of chivalry that, while paternalistic, nevertheless acknowledged women as individuals deserving courtesy rather than merely reproductive units. This distinction became immediately apparent in occupation interactions. Major William Harrington's 1945 field manual for his company explicitly stated, "German women will be addressed as Madam or Miss, according to apparent age and status. They will not be addressed as German, Fritz, or similar terms. When entering a room where women are present, hats will be removed regardless of the women's nationality." Such instructions might seem trivial, but to German women accustomed to being valued primarily for their racial characteristics and reproductive capacity, being addressed as individuals represented a fundamental shift. British occupation forces in northern Germany numbered approximately 250,000 troops by summer 1945. Military police records show that disciplinary actions related to improper conduct toward German women involved just 0.4% of this force, with severe offences accounting for only 0.02%. The British Army's court-martial system prosecuted 27 cases of serious misconduct toward German women between May and December 1945, resulting in 19 convictions with penalties ranging from reduction in rank to imprisonment with hard labour. This statistical reality contradicted everything German women had been taught to expect. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels had personally supervised the production of 12 films depicting Allied atrocities against German women, all fabricated. These productions, viewed by an estimated 8.7 million German civilians, portrayed British troops as colonial savages intent on racial degradation of Aryan womanhood. When actual British troops arrived offering tea rather than terror, the cognitive dissonance proved overwhelming. Private James Milner, 21, from Manchester, wrote home in June 1945, "The German women seem frightened of us at first. They won't look us in the eye and flinch when we move. After a few days, when they realise we're not going to harm them, they seem more confused than relieved. What have they been told about us?" This observation, repeated in hundreds of letters home, revealed the psychological warfare dimensions of proper treatment. British command understood this dynamic. General Bernard Montgomery issued Order 371 on May 12, 1945, stating, "The discipline and bearing of our troops will demonstrate the falsehood of enemy propaganda. Every soldier who maintains proper conduct toward German civilians strikes a blow against Nazi ideology, more effective than any political re-education program." Military records confirm that this order was read to 93% of occupation units within 1 week of issuance. The contrast in daily behaviour became immediately apparent. German women observed British soldiers forming orderly queues rather than pushing forward, requesting rather than demanding, apologising for inconveniences rather than expecting submission. Women who had been taught that British troops represented the chaotic mixing of inferior races instead witnessed disciplined behaviour that often exceeded what they had experienced from German authorities. In Hanover, occupation authorities established 34 distribution centres for civilian food rations. British military records document the implementation of separate queues for elderly women, pregnant women, and mothers with small children. This consideration for vulnerability, absent in late-war German distribution systems, contradicted propaganda predictions of targeted brutality toward the weakest. Elfriede Schmidt, interviewed in 1953 for an oral history project, recalled, "We were told the British would treat us like animals. Instead, they stood when we entered rooms. They carried heavy packages for elderly women. They established special food distributions for children." These small courtesies made us question everything we had been told. Military government surveys from September 1945 found that 73% of German women in British-occupied zones reported proper and correct treatment from occupation forces, with another 21% describing treatment as unexpectedly courteous. Only 6% reported any negative interactions, most involving minor rudeness rather than threatening behaviour. These statistics represented complete failure of Nazi propaganda predictions. The psychological impact of this reality gap created the conditions for fundamental ideological transformation. German women who had steeled themselves to endure brutality instead found themselves navigating unfamiliar social territory, where they were addressed as madam rather than woman, where their personal boundaries were respected rather than violated, where they were treated with formal courtesy by the very men propaganda had portrayed as subhuman. Daily life under British occupation revealed contrasts that no propaganda could withstand. In Schleswig-Holstein, occupation authorities established 27 community kitchens by July 1945. German women, expecting to be last in line for food, instead found British soldiers implementing strict rationing systems that prioritised children, pregnant women, and the elderly, regardless of nationality. Captain Thomas Blackwood's records from Kiel document that British troops received 3,500 calories daily, while ensuring German children received 1,500, significantly more than the 600-calorie rations Nazi authorities had provided in final war months. Housing arrangements presented opportunities for daily interactions that contradicted expectations. Military government requisitioned 4,200 undamaged homes for officer quarters across northern Germany. In each case, meticulous protocols governed these arrangements. Lieutenant Edward Mills wrote in his July 1945 diary, "Moved into German home today. Elderly woman clearly terrified. Showed her the official paperwork, explained which rooms we needed, assured her private spaces would remain hers. She seemed bewildered when I asked if the arrangement was acceptable." Apparently, no one had asked her opinion on anything in years. Work assignments brought German women into regular contact with British personnel. By August 1945, approximately 23,000 German women were employed by occupation forces as translators, office workers, kitchen staff, and cleaning personnel. Employment records show British authorities established standardized 8-hour workdays, regular breaks, and prohibition of weekend work, conditions superior to those many had experienced under Nazi labor regulations. German women earned between 75-90 Reichsmarks weekly, paid punctually every Friday, reliability that contradicted their expectations of exploitation. Language barriers created both challenges and unexpected moments of connection. British occupation forces distributed 47,000 German phrasebooks to troops by June 1945. These guides included specific sections on respectful phrases when addressing women, with phonetic pronunciations of courteous expressions. Military records document 156 informal language exchange groups formed between British personnel and local civilians, with German women teaching German and learning English in return. These exchanges, initially practical, evolved into cultural dialogues that humanized both sides. Small courtesies made profound impressions. Helga Brandt, interviewed in 1952, recalled her first encounter with British officers in Bremen. "I was carrying heavy water buckets up 3 flights of stairs. 2 British officers passed me on the stairwell. I pressed against the wall, eyes down, as we had been taught. Instead of ignoring me, they stopped, asked permission to help, and carried the buckets to my apartment door. They thanked me, for allowing them to assist. This simple kindness made me question everything I had been told about these men." British military police established procedures for addressing complaints from German women. Procedures that took women's reports seriously regardless of the accused's rank. Between May and December 1945, German women filed 371 complaints about British personnel. Records show 94% received formal investigation, with 73% resulting in some disciplinary action when evidence supported the complaint. This accountability contradicted Nazi propaganda that had portrayed Allied forces as operating with unrestricted impunity. Progressive revelation characterized German women's evolving understanding. Initial relief at not being assaulted gave way to confusion about respectful treatment, then to reassessment of propaganda claims. Military government surveys from September 1945 show that when asked what surprised them most about British occupation, 62% of German women cited unexpected politeness, 27% mentioned fairness in resource distribution, and 11% noted willingness to listen to complaints. These surveys reveal the cognitive dissonance experienced as reality repeatedly contradicted expectations. Grocery distribution points became unexpected theatres of behavioural contrast. British quartermaster records document implementation of the ladies' first principle at all 127 civilian distribution centres in their occupation zone. German women, accustomed to brutal competition for scarce resources during final war years, encountered orderly queues where elderly women were offered seats while waiting, where mothers with infants received priority service, where British military police prevented pushing or queue jumping with polite but firm interventions. Cultural misunderstandings revealed deeper differences in gender expectations. Captain James Wilson reported confusion when German women stood waiting for permission to sit in their own homes when British officers visited. His October 1945 report notes, "Must remind personnel that German women have been conditioned to await male permission for basic activities. Our practice of standing when women enter rooms or offering them chairs first creates visible confusion. These simple courtesies appear to be unfamiliar, suggesting different gender relations under previous regime." Documentary evidence from Red Cross observers confirms this pattern. Their August 1945 assessment states, "German women display noticeable disorientation when encountering British social protocols. Actions. Western women would consider basic courtesy, doors held, packages carried, seats offered, appear to surprise German women across age groups and social classes. This suggests systematic differences in male-female interaction patterns under National Socialism. Psychological transformation proceeded through predictable stages." Military psychologist Major Robert Thompson documented this progression in his December 1945 report. German female subjects initially display relief at absence of feared violence, followed by confusion regarding courteous treatment, then curiosity about British social norms, and finally critical reassessment of previous beliefs. This sequence appears consistently across interview subjects, suggesting systematic ideological shift through accumulated experiences rather than formal re-education. Testimonial evidence supports this analysis. Ilse Weber, former BDM, League of German Girls, leader interviewed in 1947 stated, "We expected the British to behave like beasts because that's what we were told they were, not fully human. When they instead behaved with greater courtesy than our own men, it forced us to question not just that specific lie, but all the other lies we had been told. If they had mistreated us, it would have confirmed everything. Their restraint and formality destroyed our worldview more effectively than any punishment could have." Organized social interactions between British personnel and German civilians began cautiously in late summer 1945. Military government records document the establishment of 37 community centres across the British occupation zone by September, each hosting regulated social events designed to normalise relations while maintaining appropriate oversight. The first official dance held in Hamburg on August 12, 1945, followed strict protocols. Formal invitations issued to pre-screened German women, chaperones present, alcohol limited to 1 glass of beer per person, and all participants home by 10:30 p.m. Captain Richard Davies, tasked with organising this initial event, recorded in his official report, "Dance proceeded with remarkable formality. British officers appeared more nervous than German guests. All men remained in full uniform. Dancing maintained appropriate distance. German women expressed surprise at being asked permission before being led to dance floor. Several commented they had never experienced such formality at social functions. This observation highlighted how even recreational activities revealed contrasting gender expectations. Fraternization policies evolved rapidly as occupation stabilized. Initial non-fraternization directives issued in May 1945 prohibited all social contact between occupation forces and German civilians. Military records show these restrictions proved unenforceable, with 2,736 reported violations in June 1945 alone. By July, recognizing the counterproductive nature of these barriers, British authorities implemented graduated relaxation of restrictions. The revised policy, Military Government Ordinance 214, permitted appropriate supervised social interaction while maintaining prohibitions against romantic relationships and private meetings. Statistical evidence reveals the impact of these policy changes. By December 1945, British occupation forces had organised 173 community dances, 89 sporting events, 52 theatrical performances, and 104 film showings involving both military personnel and German civilians. Attendance records show approximately 47,000 German women participated in these functions. Post-event surveys indicated that 84% of German female attendees reported unexpectedly respectful treatment, with only 3% noting any uncomfortable interactions. German male reactions to British treatment of women ranged from resentment to reluctant admiration. Lieutenant James Morrison observed in his November 1945 report, "Local men watch British-German interactions with visible discomfort. Several incidents of German men criticizing women for attending mixed functions. Complaints focus on excessive friendliness rather than impropriety, suggesting wounded pride rather than legitimate concern." Military police recorded 173 incidents of German men confronting women who had participated in authorized social events, requiring intervention in 42 cases. Cultural exchanges occurred organically through these supervised interactions. British troops introduced unfamiliar social customs. Women being served first at refreshment tables, men standing when women entered rooms, formal introductions where women's names were given priority. German women encountered British ball dance styles where male partners maintained formal distance rather than the closer hold common in German dances. These seemingly minor differences carried significant symbolic weight in restructuring gender interactions. Captain Thomas Wilson's December 1945 report notes, "Christmas social function included traditional British paper crackers. German women appeared genuinely moved when receiving these simple party favours and being invited to wear the paper crowns. Several commented they had not received any gift, however modest, in over 3 years. The contrast between their previous leaders who demanded sacrifices and their supposed enemies who shared small pleasures created visible impact. Challenges to this general pattern certainly existed." Military police records document 134 serious incidents involving British personnel and German women between May 1945 and January 1946. Each case received full investigation, with 97 resulting in courts-martial and punishments including imprisonment, discharge, and in 3 cases, execution for rape. The transparent handling of these violations, with proceedings reported in occupation newspapers, contrasted sharply with the systematic impunity German women had witnessed under Nazi authority for similar offences by German men. Statistical analysis reveals the rarity of these violations. With approximately 250,000 British troops interacting with roughly 4 million German women in their occupation zone, documented serious incidents represented 0.05% of personnel. German women had greater statistical likelihood of mistreatment by fellow Germans than by British occupiers, a reality that contradicted propaganda expectations of widespread brutality. Organised recreational activities reflected broader structural differences between British and Nazi administrative approaches. Where Nazi organisations had divided women by racial categories, British authorities organised social functions by practical groupings: age, family status, and community role. Dance committees typically included equal numbers of British and German representatives, with German women holding equal voting power on arrangements. A participatory approach unfamiliar under previous authority structures. Statistical records from Hamburg Community Centre show the evolution of social integration. October 1945, events averaged 73% British, 27% German attendance. By December, proportions had shifted to 58% British, 42% German. January 1946 records show near equal participation, 52% British, 48% German. This normalization process contradicted propaganda predictions that British racial arrogance would maintain permanent separation from inferior Germans. Food sharing during these functions carried particular significance in a period of severe shortages. British mess records from November 1945 show reallocation of 17,000 pounds of flour, 8,400 pounds of sugar, and 5,300 pounds of tea from military supplies to community events. German women accustomed to extreme rationing encountered refreshment tables offering sandwiches, biscuits, and tea in quantities that seemed extraordinary after years of deprivation. This willingness to share limited resources contradicted propaganda claims of Allied intentions to starve the German population. Testimonial evidence confirms the transformative impact of these experiences. Margaret Schulz, interviewed in 1952, recalled, "I attended a Christmas party at the British Officers' Club in December 1945. I had lost my husband at Stalingrad and my son in Berlin. I expected nothing from life anymore. A British captain offered me tea, asked about my family, and listened, really listened, to my story. When I finished, he said simply, 'I am so very sorry for your loss, madam.' This small moment of being treated as a human being worthy of compassion from someone who should have hated me changed something fundamental in my understanding. By early 1946, social relations in the British zone had established patterns dramatically contrary to Nazi propaganda predictions. German women who had expected to be treated as spoils of war instead found themselves addressed as madam, served first at tables, and treated with formal courtesy. The psychological impact of this reality gap accelerated the collapse of Nazi ideological structures more effectively than any direct re-education program could have achieved. Ideological transformation proceeded through accumulated experiences rather than sudden conversion. By spring 1946, German women in the British occupation zone displayed measurable shifts in their fundamental assumptions. Military government surveys conducted in April 1946 asked women to rate agreement with the statement, "British occupation forces have treated German women with unexpected respect." Results showed 78% strong agreement, 16% moderate agreement, 4% neutral responses, and only 2% disagreement. These findings represented complete inversion of expectations shaped by Nazi propaganda. The collapse of racial ideology proved particularly significant. Goebbels' propaganda had emphasized supposed British racial degeneracy, claiming their empire had diluted Anglo-Saxon purity. Instead, German women encountered disciplined, formal behavior that exceeded their experiences under supposedly racially pure German authority. Helga Weber, former Nazi Women's League district leader, wrote in her May 1946 diary, "I believed completely in German racial superiority. Yet these British men from diverse backgrounds display greater self-discipline, courtesy, and moral restraint than our own leadership ever demonstrated. This contradiction cannot be resolved except by acknowledging we were systematically deceived." Relationship patterns evolved as occupation progressed. Military government records document 1,247 approved engagements between British personnel and German women by December 1946. Marriage records show 734 official unions performed by January 1947. These relationships, initially forbidden under non-fraternization policies, received formal authorization through Military Government Ordinance 328, issued in March 1946. Which established a comprehensive review process requiring character references, background checks, and commanding officer approval. British women's organisations became unexpected bridges between cultures. The Women's Voluntary Service, established in Britain during the War for Civil Defence, deployed 327 representatives to the occupation zone by summer 1946. These women organised 42 centres teaching practical skills. Cooking with limited ingredients, remaking clothing, childcare techniques, while modelling British female assertiveness that contrasted with Nazi gender roles. German attendance records show approximately 23,000 women participated in these programs, with waiting lists at most locations. Statistical analysis of cultural exchange reveals systematic differences from Nazi-era women's organisations. Where the Nazi Frauenschaft emphasized racial purity, motherhood, and submission, British women's groups focused on practical skills, community building, and dignified self-sufficiency. German participants completed 4,372 course evaluations between June 1946 and December 1947. Content analysis shows the most frequent positive comments referenced practical rather than ideological focus, 37%, respectful treatment as equal participants, 28%, and emphasis on individual dignity rather than collective duty, 23%. Individual transformation stories illuminate broader patterns. Frieda Müller, 24, former BDM, League of German Girls, section leader, documented her evolving perspective in letters to her brother, a prisoner of war in Canada. Her June 1945 letter stated, "The British have arrived. We fear the worst." By August, she wrote, "British officers requisitioned our neighbour's home. We expected brutality, but they are formal to the point of discomfort." Her October letter noted, "Working as translator for British headquarters, they treat me with professional courtesy I never experienced in similar German offices." By March 1946, her perspective had fundamentally shifted. Attending English classes taught by British captain's wife, she treats German women as intellectual equals. This contradicts everything we were taught about our limited feminine capacity for rational thought. British perspective changes emerged through sustained contact. Captain Richard Davies wrote to his wife in Birmingham, "When we arrived, we viewed all Germans as complicit Nazis. Prolonged interaction has revealed a more complex reality. The women here were victims of their own government before becoming our responsibility. They were systematically lied to about us, then systematically abandoned by their own men. Their surprise at basic courtesy reveals more about what they endured than any intelligence report could. Documentary evidence from the International Red Cross confirms this evolving dynamic. Their confidential assessment dated November 1946 states, "Relations between British occupation forces and German female civilians have progressed from initial fear through confusion to tentative respect. German women consistently report surprise at treatment as individuals rather than as defeated enemies or racial inferiors. This individualized approach has proven more effective at undermining Nazi ideological residue than formal denazification lectures." Marriage records reveal geographical patterns of relationship formation. Hamburg, with its 47 British administrative offices employing 1,683 German women as support staff, recorded 173 British-German marriages by December 1946. Rural areas with limited administrative presence showed significantly lower rates, with the agricultural district of Rothenburg recording only 7 such unions, despite similar population. This correlation between administrative employment and marriage rates suggests that professional respect often preceded personal relationships. Letters from German women to British families reveal personal dimensions of ideological transformation. Military censors reviewing outgoing mail documented 3,172 letters from German women to British in-laws between June 1946 and March 1947. Content analysis shows recurring themes. Expressions of gratitude for acceptance, 72%. Acknowledgement of prior misconceptions about Britain, 64%. And aspirations for post-occupation life in the UK, 57%. These communications represented profound ideological reversal from Nazi-era beliefs about British society. British veterans returning home with German wives created further cultural bridges. Home Office records show 1,141 German women had relocated to Britain by December 1947. Interviews conducted for integration assessment reveal that 87% reported positive reception by British communities, though 62% noted occasional social difficulties related to recent enemy status. British families typically demonstrated greater acceptance than wider communities, with 73% of German wives reporting completely welcoming treatment from immediate family members. The psychological journey from fear to understanding varied in duration, but followed consistent patterns. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, British military psychologist, documented these stages in her February 1947 report, German female subjects typically progress from initial terror, expecting violation, to confusion, encountering courtesy, to curiosity, questioning propaganda, to anger, recognizing deception, to acceptance, rebuilding worldview. This process requires approximately 4 to 7 months of regular positive interactions, with younger women generally adapting more quickly than those with longer exposure to Nazi ideology. By 1947, the transformation was sufficiently complete that many German women who had feared British arrival now feared their eventual departure. Community surveys conducted in March 1947 show that when asked about planned reduction of occupation forces, 64% of German women expressed concern about declining security and economic opportunities, while only 12% welcomed the prospect of reduced foreign presence. This statistical reversal, from fearing British arrival to fearing British departure, represented the complete collapse of Nazi ideological conditioning regarding their supposed enemies. The legacy of British-German interactions extended across generations. Children born from these relationships, approximately 10,000 by 1955, according to British Home Office records, grew up embodying the physical and cultural reconciliation between former enemies. These children, raised with dual heritage, became unwitting ambassadors between nations. Biographical studies conducted in the 1970s show that 73% of these children maintained active connections with both British and German relatives, creating family networks that transcended previous national animosities. Margaret Schmidt-Williams, born in 1947 to a German mother and British father, recalled in a 1997 interview, "My mother told me she had expected British soldiers to be monsters. Instead, she met my father, who opened doors for her and asked permission to smoke in her presence. These simple courtesies," she said, destroyed her belief in German superiority more effectively than any military defeat. This personal testimony exemplifies how intimate interactions reshaped worldviews more thoroughly than formal re-education programs ever could. Historical significance extended beyond personal relationships. Anglo-German diplomatic relations benefited from the foundation of mutual respect established during occupation. Foreign Office correspondence from 1950 explicitly references the positive relationship developed between British forces and German civilians, particularly women, as facilitating faster normalization than originally anticipated. When West Germany regained sovereignty in 1955, British diplomats noted that relations had progressed from formal occupation to genuine partnership in just 10 years, a transition that took generations after previous conflicts. Comparative analysis reveals striking differences in women's experiences across Allied occupation zones. Soviet occupation records document approximately 240,000 reported sexual assaults against German women between 1945 and 1949, while American zone records show 11,500 reported cases. British zone records document 1,362 cases during the same period, with 97% receiving formal investigation and 84% resulting in disciplinary action when evidence supported allegations. This statistical contrast created lasting impressions about respective occupying forces. Emma Schneider, interviewed in 1986, articulated this comparison. "We women said among ourselves, 'Better an English gentleman than a Russian liberator.' The Americans were friendly, but often crude. The French were formal, but distant. The British treated German women with a consistent dignity that seemed remarkable after what we had endured. This unexpected decency accomplished what force could never achieve. It made us question our own beliefs." Broader conclusions emerged from this historical experience. The transformation of German women's attitudes demonstrated that behavioral example proved more powerful than formal propaganda. Denazification classes, with their abstract lectures on democratic principles, achieved less measurable impact than daily experiences of being treated with basic human dignity. Military Government Effectiveness reports from December 1947 concluded that observed British conduct toward German women has contributed more to ideological reconstruction than formal re-education programs, at fraction of the resource expenditure. Modern echoes of this historical relationship persist in contemporary Anglo-German relations. Polling data from 2018 shows Germans rank Britain as their third most trusted international partner, behind only France and the United States. When respondents over age 75 were isolated, those with direct memory of occupation, Britain moved to first position, with 73% expressing high trust, compared to 68% for France and 62% for America. This generational difference suggests that personal experiences during occupation created lasting positive associations. Statistical summary illuminates the scale and impact of these historical interactions. Between 1945 and 1955, the British zone hosted approximately 1.2 million occupation personnel who interacted with roughly 8.4 million German civilians, including approximately 4.6 million women. These interactions produced 22,371 documented British-German marriages, 10,000 recorded children, and 7,642 German war brides relocating to Britain. Beyond these measurable outcomes, attitude surveys show fundamental shifts in German women's perspectives on gender relations, democratic values, and international cooperation. The philosophical dimension of this historical experience reveals how human decency undermined ideological hatred more effectively than military force alone. German women, who had been systematically conditioned to view British men as racial enemies, discovered individual humanity through daily interactions. The power of open doors, chairs offered, packages carried, and formal address transformed abstract enemies into recognizable human beings, making continued hatred psychologically untenable. Contemporary German-British cultural exchanges reflect this historical foundation. Educational programs between the countries show the highest participation rates in Europe, with 126,000 German students studying in Britain and 47,000 British students in Germany during 2019. Business partnerships, diplomatic cooperation, and tourism flows all benefit from the positive associations established during occupation years, when expected brutality gave way to unexpected courtesy. Martin Schmidt, son of a German mother and British father, founded the Anglo-German Heritage Foundation in 1978. The organization has documented 3,742 oral histories from women who experienced British occupation, creating an invaluable historical archive. Analysis of these testimonies reveals consistent narrative patterns: initial fear based on propaganda, shock at experiencing courtesy, fundamental questioning of previously accepted beliefs, and eventual rejection of Nazi ideological frameworks. Modern German gender expectations reflect partial British influence from this period. Sociological studies note that northern German regions under British occupation developed gender interaction patterns more closely resembling British norms than did southern regions under American occupation. These regional differences, documented in studies of conversational patterns, social expectations, and formal courtesy behaviors, persist subtly in contemporary German society, representing the enduring legacy of occupation experiences. Final testimonials illuminate the profound impact of this historical moment. Hildegard Meyer, interviewed at age 93 in 2015, offered perhaps the most powerful summary. "I was 23 when the British arrived. I had lost everything: my husband, my home, my faith in our leaders. I expected the worst from these enemies we had been taught to hate. Instead, they addressed me as Madam, asked permission before entering rooms, and treated me with a dignity our own men rarely showed. This simple human respect, when I expected only brutality, did not just change my view of the British. It changed my understanding of humanity itself. I learned that those we are taught to hate may show us more kindness than those who claim to fight for us. This lesson shaped my entire life." This testimony captures the essence of a remarkable historical paradox. German comfort women expected brutality from British soldiers, but instead encountered gentlemen. The transformation this experience triggered, from fear to confusion to understanding, revealed the power of simple human decency to overcome even the most systematic ideological conditioning. When expected, monsters behave like gentlemen. Worldviews collapse and rebuild along different lines. The British soldiers who treated German women like proper ladies accomplished something no artillery barrage could achieve. They conquered hearts and minds through the revolutionary act of basic human respect.